What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Absolute Strength Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Hunt, back with another episode. Today we have a unique show. I got thinking, and this year it's 2019, which is kind of significant in my career because I started in the fitness industry in 2009. And I graduated high school in 2009. Graduated high school, 17, is a little bit young for my grade always. And that summer, the summer between high school and college, is when I got my start in the fitness industry. I started working at a gym. And then it wasn't long before I started my website, and then within a year had Hunt Fitness up and running. But 2009, summer of 2009 was when I got my start in the fitness industry. And I've done nothing since. I've been in the fitness industry for 10 years. It's crazy. I'm only 27 years old, turning 28 in October, with already 10 years of experience in the industry. So I was thinking, it's like, you know what? I would like to come up with a few things. Ended up coming up with 10 things that I've learned over the years. 10 things I've learned from 10 years of coaching in the fitness industry. And to provide value here, I tried to think a little bit outside of the box. Some things that might not be in every list like this or every podcast like this. Wanted to come up with a few things that you've maybe not even heard me talk about before. So this should be a pretty cool show. I like where the idea, the thought process went here. I have 10 things, which this could take me about a year to get through, but I'll try to blow through these pretty quickly. And get back on, I've been saying this the last couple of podcasts, but now we're finally at a point where I think I can get back on a normal schedule. Earlier this week, I turned in my official finished manuscript for my book. The main writing process is done, but there's still a lot of work to do before the book comes out this fall. But my writing part, at least the majority of it, there'll still be updates and edits and stuff, but for the most part on my end, the main writing is done. Got it done in about 2 months. Seems like most people I talk to take about 2 years to write a book. I did it in 2 months, so I'm kind of happy with that. I just wanted to put my head down and get that shit done. It's crazy how life works, because when the book was finalized, so when the publisher and I finalized the contract and everything and laid out the writing schedule and started, no joke, was pretty much one of the busiest times I've ever been. Like with the coaching, with Hunt Fitness and all that encompasses, but then other projects I have going on, I was literally probably the busiest I've ever been. And then on top of that, start a book. It doesn't make sense. Especially because last year, so 2018, it was just a typical year. I wasn't extra busy, wasn't really extra slow. It was just a normal year. And on a normal year, I think adding a book would have been, at any point it would have been hard, but it would have been manageable. Now, at this time, starting the book when, like I said, I was probably the busiest I've ever been, it was quite the challenge, but got it done for the most part, and I'm ready to get back on the podcast game. Got some cool shows lined up for the next couple months, and a lot of solo shows. I don't know. I don't know what it is lately. Probably just because I've been so busy and haven't been able to schedule with guests, but I've just been really digging doing solo shows. Like, I know I've talked to other podcasters, and some don't like it. Some feel like, I don't know, they just are out of their element doing just a solo podcast, just talking to the mic. And don't get me wrong, I love doing the interviews. I think that's probably a little bit more fun just because you can get some interaction, etc. But there is something about just doing a solo podcast where I can take it any direction and just have fun with it. It's pretty fun. So before we get to the 10 things I've learned in the last 10 years, a couple updates. One, obviously this podcast is sponsored by PR Breaker. PR Breaker Materia is the pre-workout I use and recommend. I know a lot of you guys use it and recommend it too. I see a lot of the posts on social media, and plus I see most of my clients letting me know, hey, PR Breaker's for real. It's funny how, and I think a lot of it has to do with just the social media culture that we live in. that you could listen to over 200 episodes of this podcast. You can hear me talk about how, I don't know, whatever I talk about on this show, gain a little bit of trust from me, like what you hear, or not like what you hear, but you're still here listening, so you must like it to some degree. But you like what I have to say about fitness. You like what I have to say about whatever else is I talk about, and gain a little bit of trust. But then you still are skeptical. You still are skeptical about trying PR Breaker, which I don't even recommend a lot of products on here. I've talked about that. I'm really picky on anything I'll recommend. So if I do recommend something on here, it's because I think it will bring value to your life. So trust me on that. But whatever. Still, at that point, after all this being said, you're still skeptical. But you're like, you know what? I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. I'll pull the trigger. I'll try some of that sour gummy worm PR Breaker. I'll try mixing the blue raz materia with the orange creamsicle materia. Just give it a shot. I'll give it a shot. And then you try it. And then you send me a DM on Instagram and saying, Kyle, holy shit, you were right. This tastes amazing. And my workouts are going great. What do you know? You were telling the truth. And I'm like, hey, guess what? What a novel idea. I told the truth on the podcast. I wasn't just trying to sell you something. I'm not about the affiliate dollars. If I was, I would be doing CBD oil reads every podcast. I would be doing a CBD ad every podcast. But guess what? Every week I get asked to. CBD, man, that's a whole nother. I've talked about it before. And trust me, hey, if you've tried it and it benefits you, you feel like it benefits you, whether it does or it's a placebo effect, whatever, if it benefits you, hey, continue doing it. But it's heavily marketed right now. Like, you can't even go on Instagram without seeing 10 people like promoting CBD. It's super hype right now. Everyone's, got to promote that discount code, make a couple affiliate dollars. But I've tried it. Companies have sent it to me. I've given it a shot. I haven't found anything. It hasn't benefited me at all. So because of that, I can't promote it. But I'm not going to say that it might not help you. So, I mean, if you tried it and you do like it, continue. But I have a feeling, just a hunch, that the vast majority of the people you see promoting it on social media, they don't really see a benefit from it. That's just my hunch. I could be completely wrong. But I would assume that the majority of the influencers that are promoting CBD oil are just doing it to make money. Again, I'm one guy, but that's my guess. Anyway, if you want to try a product that I do feel works, check out PR Breaker Materia. Use the discount code HUNT10 to save yourself some money and help support the Absolute Strength podcast. Also, if you are interested in getting a Absolute Strength podcast t-shirt, head over to kylehuntfitness.shop or just click the link in the show notes. Get yourself a t-shirt, and you can help support the podcast that way as well. All right, let's get to the show. Let's just get to the show. I'm excited about this one. 10 things. Might take me 10 years to get through it, but here we go. All right, so the first thing, and I actually think this one might be the most important, and it might be the one that may surprise you the most. We might go in a different direction here than you might think when you originally clicked on this podcast. First thing I've learned in the last 10 years, oftentimes the biggest limitation people have in their fitness journey, probably in anything, but I'm talking fitness here, is a lack of confidence. A lack of confidence. So what do I mean by this? And I'll give you a personal example here. And I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, but when I look back on my childhood, when I was really young, like elementary school age, I think that was probably my biggest limitation. Like, I didn't do very well in school. I didn't even really do that great in sports quite yet. I started wrestling young, even started playing football pretty young, and I don't know, I was just always like the smallest kid in my grade. Didn't do that great on tests and stuff in school and like elementary school, and then didn't even really do that good athletically. Like, I loved playing sports, but I was just kind of average, so I didn't have a lot of confidence. I just thought, shit, I'm just an average average dude, average kid here. And then right around 6th grade, I don't know, maybe I just caught up to me and kind of got my shit together a little bit. But I started to see some success. I started to see some success in school, started getting good grades on report cards. That's when I started to get better at sports, started to get really good at wrestling at that point, started to get really good at football at that point. And then the momentum started building. Like just the things I was doing were building success. And then on top of that, I think one of the things that really helped me is when you're successful at something, and it can be anything, and then other people notice that, and then they give you respect. You get that respect for being, I don't know, a good athlete or good at school, whatever. That helps your confidence because you're getting, not only are you seeing it in yourself, you're seeing yourself be successful. So every little win that you get builds that confidence. But then other people see your wins. So then they start complimenting you as well. So that confidence just continues to get built. And then it's like a snowball effect. Then it just continues to grow. Especially if you're someone who's not very successful before, like me. I remember when I started 6th grade, I didn't have a whole lot going on. I just thought I was average at everything. And then you start making some headway, start getting some wins under your belt, and then just everything took off. And I think that was a big turning point for me. Because really at the end of the day, really what I'm talking about is, and if we can talk about all the accessories, but really the main point here, the main point, for me anyway, was how I thought about myself. Because yeah, you can talk about what other people are saying, and that helps. You can even talk about the little mini wins that you get along the way. But none of that will matter if what you think about yourself doesn't change. And how does this relate? How does this relate with coaching and fitness? Well, I think a lot of people who struggle with their fitness, they just don't have a whole lot of confidence in themselves. And again, this might not be like a universal thing. You might be a confident person in one area. You might be a confident person at your job or in your business. You might even be a confident person in different sports you've played. Maybe back in the day you were a great athlete. You had a lot of confidence in that. You've had a lot of confidence in what you've been able to do professionally. But maybe you're a little overweight. Maybe you just never really had a lot of success in the gym. You've never had a lot of success dieting. Well, that shows. And if you've not had a lot of success before, you almost go into a new diet or go into a new training program just expecting it not to work. You do. You just go into it. And I've seen this over the years. Yeah, I've been coaching, like I said, 10 years. This is one of the biggest things that holds people back is they don't have a whole lot of confidence in themselves. So when they start, they're like, I'll give it a shot. I'll give it a shot. But it's not going to work. It's not going to work. And typically this is how actually somebody gets to coaching in the first place, is because they've probably tried on their own. And then, maybe they've probably tried multiple times on their own. They've tried multiple different training programs, multiple different diets, fad diets or whatever, any type of caloric restriction. And maybe they've seen a little bit of success, maybe not. But in the end, it never worked. So they get beaten down. They don't really think that they have a chance at reaching their fitness goals. So then they go, you know what? I've heard a lot of people talk about coaching. Let me get a coach. But they go into it with the same mindset. They go, you know what? I'm going to try this thing. I'm going to try getting a coach. But you know what? I've never been successful changing myself physically before. So it's probably not going to work, but I'll give it a shot. I have nothing to lose. And as a coach, when you recognize this, it doesn't, all right, and this is going to be a theme of this entire podcast, but this isn't an X's and O's thing. I mean, yes, you get a better training program that fits them a little bit better, meets their goals a little bit better, find a diet that they can be consistent with a little bit better, makes it as easy as possible for them to still reach their goals. Yes, that's important. The X's and O's are important, but that's not going to be the change. That's not going to be the monumental shift here. The shift is going to be mental. I think this is probably where a lot of coaches fall flat because they don't have the experience. They can't recognize this. They can't recognize the lack of confidence. They just see the lack of results, and they're like, well, shit, the person must not be doing it. Well, maybe they're not doing it, but why are they not doing it? Why are they not following the program? Do they just want to waste money? They just want to pay you to design a program for them and then just not do it? Of course they don't want to do that. No one wants to do that. But there is a reason. Could be just self-sabotage. I mean, that's very common too. A lot of times when people aren't confident that something's going to work, when it starts working, they got to come up with an excuse. They got to come up with a problem. They got to find something to hold themselves back. Again, that's confidence. If you lack confidence and something starts working, well, you better get in there and ruin it. I've seen that hundreds of times. Seen that a lot. As a coach, you got to recognize that. We got to work on that. Because if we can get over that, if we can get over whatever it is that's holding you back, and as a coach, there's a couple things here. One, if I find someone who lacks confidence, I'm a very confident person. Sometimes just working with me alone, again, I'm not trying to sound cocky here. I'm just saying that I'm a confident person. If I start something, I go into it thinking it's going to work 100%. And so much so that if I have a shred of doubt on something, I probably won't even do it. I'm not even saying that's great. That's probably taking things a little too far. But I just know based off from how I am that I tend to be, if I go into something with even a shred of doubt, then there's probably a good reason that there's a shred of doubt. Because for most things, I'd say the majority of things in my life, I go into it it's going to work. Even if the cards are stacked against me, I'm assuming it's going to work. So sometimes, and I've found this with clients in the past, that when you just have that steady voice, that confidence being projected, it helps you. If you're working with a coach and you're a little unsure, you're not really too confident, but the coach is 100% confident, it helps. It definitely helps. And I think just that alone, I think that's helped a lot of people. Is just, I'm very confident in whatever plan I put on paper and send to a client. I'm very confident in it. I'm 100% confident it's going to work. And I try to project that, like, hey, this is going to work. If we can just get this executed, we're going to be successful. Now, as a coach, I got to help you execute it. But if we can get there, it's going to work. But secondly, and this shifts over into the mindset point, is how can we just foster a little bit more confidence in the client themselves? And everybody listening right now, this isn't just a coaching point. This is just, hey, how can you be more confident in what you're doing in the gym, what you're doing nutritionally? Well, one, you have to believe in it. You have to believe in it. Like, you actually have to believe what you're actually doing is going to work. But how do we get there? Well, a couple things. One, I think little wins are important. So a big issue people have, and this speaks to fad diets and why most fad diets don't work. And I've had this conversation with a lot of clients in the past when we start a fat loss phase. Initially, they're like, damn, I don't think I can lose fat or weight on how many calories you have me eating. And I'm like, well, a couple things here. One, well, if by chance that you don't lose fat, lose weight after a couple weeks, well, guess what? We're going to have the data and we can make an adjustment. But here's the other thing. The reason, most likely, that you feel like the starting point is too high calorie for you is because it's not a crash diet. It's not super aggressive. We're just trying to lose weight at a steady pace. And most fad diets are just that you drastically cut calories and it's very aggressive right off the bat. And you can lose a bunch of weight initially, but how long can you be consistent with that? It's like anything else. Like, yeah, there's an aggressive way and then there's a sustainable way. There's actually an argument to be made in some circumstances that there's both options can work well. But for most people, especially someone who lacks confidence, lacks success in dieting and fitness, The crash dieting way probably is a recipe for disaster. So I think mini wins, setting standards, setting mini goals, and then finding a way to achieve them. Get some wins. Get some wins under your belt. I think, like I've said before, like dieting and training, like if you start right off the bat with something super aggressive nutritionally, super aggressive training-wise, like if you've not really been dieting, not really been training, but then automatically you jump on a huge deficit, caloric restricted diet and training 5-6 days a week, like how many you're going to get 1 week and fall off, and then you miss one day, and then this is why it gets problematic is you miss one day, and then you're like, oh, I'm a failure. Well, you went from 0 to 5 days. That's really good, That's better than most. Shit, you could miss if you had a 6 day a week. If you started out at 0, like you weren't training at all, jumped on a 6 day a week program, and you missed 3 days. You'd feel terrible, but you were still doing amazing. You have to put that in perspective, put that in context. If you're starting at 0, 2 days a week of training is good. 3 days is amazing. Just get some mini wins. Because guess what? The starting point doesn't have to be the end point. The starting point shouldn't be the end point. The starting point shouldn't even be the midpoint. Where you start is level 1. You get some wins, build some momentum, get some good habits ingrained. Then you go to level 2. Do the same thing. Then level 3. There's levels to everything. Accomplish level 1 before moving on. And then what's funny is who you become when you shift levels. You bump up a level. You become that next level. You see your confidence rise. You see all those little excuses start to subside. All that self-sabotage we talked about. That starts to go away. You're not coming up with minor injuries that are going to hold you back. You're not coming up with all these little excuses why you can't follow the diet plan. You realize that, when I go out to eat, there are actually healthy options. I don't have to go completely off the wagon and order some elaborate pasta dish every time I go out to eat. I could get a steak and broccoli and a sweet potato. I could do that. I could get a grilled chicken breast and a salad. Like, that's an option. It was on the menu. Once you start to build momentum, you start to find solutions, not problems. Next thing. Number 2, everyone is unique and different, but probably not as much as you think. Okay, so what we're talking about here. All right, first off, I just want to say everyone is very unique, and everybody responds to training differently. Everybody needs a unique program. Everybody needs a unique nutrition setup. Everybody needs a bunch of unique and customized things. That's one reason why coaching is so beneficial. Yeah, you can make progress, and this is kind of what I'm going to get into here, is you can just find a training program online, find a basic diet online, and you can make progress with that. If you can stick to it, you can absolutely make progress with that. That's why I do put out ebooks, put out programs like Absolute Progress Power Building Program or Absolute Strength 1 and 2, things like that, my bench press ebooks. Because there is a way to make progress that way. You definitely can. If I didn't believe that you could make progress that way, I wouldn't put out those products. But there is a reason why customized and customization is important, because there's a limit to how much progress you can make with just a cookie cutter based program. There is a limit. And shit, some coaches just give you cookie cutter based programs, and it's a whole nother point. But there's a limit to that because it's not 100% customized to you. But then why does it work? Well, it works because the majority of people respond similar enough that a generic program will get you results. Especially depending on what you were doing before, but especially if the program's better than what you were doing before, then you're going to see progress based off from that. If you go from not training very intelligently at all, you just were kind of throwing things together, winging it, and then you have a structured program, well, that little bit of structure is better than what you were doing before. Looking at all the training variables, it sets up well to make progress in what your goals are, then you're going to see progress that way. And like I said, because everyone's different, but they're not drastically different. And you see this a lot when you see it nutritionally and training wise, but everyone has their own unique starting point and where you want to get them from point A to point B. And everyone needs a customized program, but then how they respond to that, like everyone does respond uniquely and different, but within a range. So I can pretty much predict how someone's going to respond to a diet or a training program. If everything is followed, execution's good, we don't hit any roadblocks, I can pretty much predict how someone's going to respond within a range. And within that range, depending on genetics, depending on a lot of different factors, you may respond a little bit better within that range, or you may respond a little bit less within that range. But it's still within the range. It's not crazy. Everyone's not so unique that the basic rules of how people progress in training and dieting go out the window. And you see this a lot. You'll see people, whether it's on social media, and a lot of this has to do with marketing, because creating fear is a great way to market products. I mean, you see it all the time. It's a great way to market it from the business side, but it's not great from the consumer side, because you create a bunch of fear. Then people start thinking that, like, oh man, like, yeah, that's me. Like, I have all these issues. I have all these metabolic issues. That's why I haven't been able to lose fat. Man, I have all these movement issues. That's why I haven't been able to gain strength. That's why I haven't been able to gain any muscle. It's because I don't know how to walk. That's what it is. Yeah, it has to be, because I can't even put my 2 feet in front of each other and walk without getting into a bad position. My posture's just bad. That's what it is. Like, shit, I might not be able to live another 6 months if I can't learn how to sit in a chair correctly. Going off on a tangent here. But creating fear is a great way to market stuff. But when you get this fear in your head, you start thinking that you're like this unique snowflake, and that you need to fix all these other issues that are wrong with you before a program, any type of training or nutrition program, would even work for you. And that's just not the case. That's just not the case for 98% of the population. Yeah, I'm willing to say that there's I hate to just throw out arbitrary numbers here, but there's a small, very, 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 very small percentage of people that may have issues to where, you know what, hey, a normal diet just is not going to work for you, or a normal training program is just not going to work for you. You got to fix these other things first. A small percentage. But that's not, again, the small percentage is, you don't let the minority dictate the majority. So don't let the outliers dictate what you're going to do. And this goes for, honestly, when you look at elite, the elite too. Like, what we're talking about here is, don't let the people who have, the small percentage of people who have issues and they struggle with a normal diet, or they struggle with a normal training program. Don't just use the small minority there to dictate what you're going to do. But then on the flip side, the genetic freaks that are just, they respond well to most everything, and then on top of it, they're probably on performance enhancing drugs. Don't let what they're doing and the results that they're getting dictate what you put expectations on yourself for as well. And don't just follow what they do blindly either. I think on both ends of the spectrum here. And kind of going back to the point here is, look, everybody is unique. I've mentioned that, said it a couple times. And everybody has their own, they have their own position to where what would be best for them, okay? But again, what's the main point here is, it's all within a range. And I think that's what I really want to drive home. The point is, we're all unique, but we're all not that very unique. We all fit in the same range. So unless you are the very, very small percentage who's an outlier, which, if you thought of this as a graph, think of a line, and most people, look at all the little dots, are very closely grouped close to that line. Very closely grouped. But then, there might be a huge outlier who's way high on the graph, might be a huge outlier that's down on the graph, that's statistically different from the average here, that's all closely grouped to the line. But don't use those outliers to dictate to you and what you think is possible, good and bad. It's important. And a lot of times in research, and this is, the last thing I'm going to say here is, in research, those outliers get thrown right out. They get thrown out. Now, again, in real world, hey, yeah, those outliers are real people. So, again, that point has to be brought up. But you're probably not one of those people. So for you probably are going to respond to the general rules. The general rules of training and nutrition are going to apply to you, and you're going to respond to those general rules very predictably. There'll be roadblocks. Progress is never linear. It's never just, hey, we follow this and we get to there and there's no issues. That rarely happens. But especially when, over the last 10 years, again, the reason I keep harping on the fact that there's very few outliers, because I've only really, over 10 years, worked with hundreds of people, I've only really had a few outliers. True outliers. I only really had a couple true outliers. Working with hundreds and hundreds of people, only had a couple true outliers. So the odds of most people listening being a true outlier are small. Now, it's at this point, so knowing this information, okay, so if I am going to respond pretty typical to a training and nutrition program, so the key then is just getting a program that will work for you, getting a diet that will work for you and something that you can follow consistently, that you can execute. Got to find a program that you can execute. And if you can trust the fact that you are going to respond typically, well, this goes back to the first point. So if you can trust the program, you can trust the process, you can trust the fact that you are going to respond typically, that gives you more confidence. It gives you more confidence in the plan. Now you can trust the process. Next point. As a coach, the better you can communicate your message, the more successful you'll become. Communication is so important. So important. And that's something I've got better at over the years, obviously, coaching a lot of people. And actually, one thing that surprisingly has made me a better communicator is this podcast. Doing, I don't know, however many interviews I've done at this point, well over 100, I've noticed I've become a better listener, became a better communicator because I became a better listener. I think a lot of times when we're having conversations with people, there's a couple issues, especially in this day and age, 2019 and the era that we live in, there's a couple issues with communication. One, I know I've talked about this before, is we just don't have a lot of face-to-face communication anymore. We just don't. And then if we do, we're distracted. That's one of the things I love about the podcast is we can be locked in, and we're locked in. We don't have anything else going on during this time. When I'm sitting down with someone, we're having a conversation, it's just, we're locked on. We're looking at each other. We're sitting down. Our phones are away. They're on silent. They're off. No one's texting us. We're not checking our phone. We're not checking our Instagram. We're not scrolling social media. We're not, we're engaged in a conversation. We're locked in. Just that alone, just doing that consistently makes you a better communicator, makes you a better listener. But then, in order to have a good conversation, there's a second thing that most of us do if we're not mindful of it, is when we're having a conversation, very rarely, actually I don't want to say rarely, but majority of the time, we're more concerned about what we're going to say than what the other person's saying. So yeah, maybe one ear is listening to what the other person's saying, but the rest of our thoughts are, well, what am I saying next? And that's a terrible way to have a conversation, especially for a podcast. You can't have a good conversation if you're not actively listening to what the other person's saying. And, sometimes it's tough because an idea will come in your head and you're like, man, I really want to say this. This would add to the conversation, but the other person's still talking. That was tough for me initially. I was like, man, I have a good point here, but you don't want to interrupt the person. You want to let them continue what they have to say. This actually happens a lot with with stories too. Just, when you're talking with your friends, you have to remember when someone's telling a story, they're telling you a story for a reason. They want to invoke emotion. They want to tell you about this great time that they had at one point, or this great achievement they did, or this funny story, whatever. They want you to feel the emotion that they're feeling. And if you don't care, if you're just kind of half listening, but then half waiting for your story to kind of one up the person, how many times have we seen that hanging out with friends and it's like you tell a cool story, but then the other person's like, well, I got a better one. This is what I did. And then most of the time it's just bullshit. Like you can just tell. You just made up some bullshit to say just because you had nothing to say. I've probably done that back in the day. But hey, man, we're all just trying to get better. But one of the things I've learned is podcasting is like, hey, you know what? Even if you have something good to say, just let the other person continue. Because guess what? If you're a good listener, good communicator, in 10 minutes when they're done, you'll still have something good to say. And it'll probably be different, and it should be different. So going back to the point here is, one of the things I've learned is, and this is kind of the first couple points didn't really 100% relate to just coaching, wanted to bring value just that anybody can get. But this one, I think the value is just when you can communicate better, you're going to be more successful in everything. I've noticed it's made me a better coach, but if you can communicate better, you'll be better at your job too. You'll be better at building relationships with people. And one of the things that I think that enhanced communications it's made me a better coach is I've been able to create a greater partnership between coach and client. Because at the end of the day, that's what it is. In order to be the best coach you can possibly be, it really has to be a partnership. And you have to communicate your message well to the client. But then you also have to, you got to be able to ask the client what they want and what their thoughts are. And be able to get good input from them. But you got to do it in a certain way. Because a lot of times, if you just ask, one, you may not get a genuine answer. Because a client will be like, oh, wait, the coach is asking me. This goes for all coaching, not just fitness coaching. This is even, if you're playing a sport and you have a sport coach, whatever, or you're a business coach, whatever, whatever you're dealing in a coach to client situation and a coach asks for input, a lot of times the client will just be like, oh, well, I just kind of want to say what I think he wants me to say, So the better you can communicate, the better you can relate to the other person, the more genuine answer you can get, the more communication back and forth you can get. And a lot of times when you get to that point, that's where the magic is. Because again, I've said this 100 times, but part of building buy-in, and these points are kind of all building on each other here. To build confidence, again, you got to believe in the program. To believe in the program, you have to believe that if you execute it and you follow it, that you're going to get the desired results. So part of really believing in the program is you got to have something that you enjoy and you feel like you can take ownership of. Because taking ownership of the program, that's important too. Taking ownership in your own progress is important, whether you have a coach or not. Even more so if you don't have a coach. If you're just doing this on your own, whatever the training you have for yourself, whatever diet you have for yourself, you got to take complete ownership of that. And if you are working with a coach, if you have that good communication, good line of communication, it helps you take ownership of it. It helps you feel like you have input. Outside of the coaching realm, just in everyday life, at your job or whatever, whenever you're working with somebody and you're dealing with something and you can almost have the other person come up with the idea. Maybe it's your idea, but you help the other person kind of come up with it and they believe it was their idea. That's good for you. It might not seem like it, but it's good for you. You want people, because people, again, this goes back to the communication point in when you're having a conversation. People like to tell you a story. They like to have their input heard. Same thing when you're in a work environment. If if you're coming up with a point, people want to think that they were in charge, that they came up with it, that it was their idea. Whether it was 100% or not, it doesn't matter. It's important. People like to be heard. And the better communicator you can be, the better listener you can be, the more successful you're going to be in whatever it is that you do. I recommend, if you haven't, I've recommended it before, but the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, Dale Carnegie. It's an old book, really old book. I have it on audio. I listen to it about once a year. I'm due to listen to it again. Highly recommend it. I think everyone should go out and get that. All right, next point. All right, the fourth thing. Not everyone is an athlete, and that's okay. All right, so this is something that you see people talk about a lot. Well, like, oh, everyone's an athlete, or you train everyone like they're an athlete. And I get that point. I get it, because I think everyone has the potential to be an athlete, but that doesn't mean they are an athlete. And let's define what I'm talking about here. Really, we have two things I want to talk about, and both of them kind of apply the same way. One, if someone's played sports their entire life, they're an athlete, and they're going to respond to training a little bit different. Even if they've never really lifted weights before, they're not starting out at the same point as someone who's never lifted weights before, but then also hasn't played sports before. Both physically and mentally, they're at a different starting point. Secondly, the second thing I want to talk about is, and this happens sometimes people have never played a sport before in their life. They've never played organized sports, never played sports in school, etc. And then they come to you or they want to start lifting, and they're coming in as you would consider them a non-athlete. It's like, oh, you've never played sports before, you're not an athlete. But then you get them into a training program, and then they respond really well, and then it turns out that they really are an athlete, because almost everything that you give them, they do really well. And their technique, like right off the bat, after some minor coaching, is like excellent. They're just responding very, very well. Their body mechanics are great. Their movement's great. They're lifting well. You're like, shit, and you said you were never an athlete. I actually have a client right now that kind of fits into this category. One of my powerlifting clients from Texas, Brian, he has never played any sports before, and I couldn't really believe it after we worked with each other for a few months, because just his movement was really good, his progress responding to the training was excellent, and it was funny. We actually had this conversation on a call one time. I was like, man, you never played sports before. I couldn't believe it. And he's like, no. And I'm like, well shit. Like, it's kind of crazy just because how athletic you are, not based off from what we've done in the weight room, which I recognize it's kind of limited, but I have a pretty good sense when I can see how people respond to training. I'm like, shit, I can see how you would play sports. I could see how you would respond to other physical things. And generally it's, it's easy to see. Now, so how does this apply to everyone listening? Well, look, this kind of goes to a little bit to, I want to talk about both things, physically and the mental side. So physically, I mean, if you're just genetically, you're a good athlete, you move well, you respond to training well, like that plays a part. It definitely plays a part, because again, like we've talked about earlier in the earlier points in the show, everyone's going to fall into that range, but where you fall into that range is largely genetic. So whether you're at the top of the range, respond very, very well, or you're near the bottom of the range and you don't respond as well, you need a little bit more intricate programming, intricate nutritional setup to make you successful. That's all important. Now, again, just because you haven't played sports before doesn't necessarily mean you're not an athlete. Perfect example was my client that I just mentioned. But then also, just because you've played sports before doesn't necessarily mean you're going to respond like an athlete does or will. So again, a lot of this goes to what sport you played too, and then how you are responding to training initially in first few months, first year of training. Like you can pretty much tell at that point, okay, how am I going to respond to training? And when you're dealing with someone who responds very well, from a coaching standpoint, and really from just a overall programming standpoint is like, hey, if things are working, like just kind of nudge them along. Like find something that's working and just keep going. It's funny when I'll have people come to me and they're like, man, everything's going really, really well. What should we change? I'm like, well, listen to what we just said. Like everything's going very, very well. Why would we need to change anything beyond just the overall scheme of the programming for the yearly periodization, working towards whatever goal we're working towards? But if our plan is working, we got to just stick to it. Now, on the flip side, a lot of times if things aren't going well, we got to look at why. Well, maybe it's programming. Maybe it's the X's and O's, as I like to say. But it could be something else. Again, it could be execution. But I want to talk about the mental component. So one of the things I've noticed in years of coaching is the mental side obviously is very, very important. But for non-athletes, this training may be some of the first real physical exertion that they've had in their life. They've never really been pushed physically before, so they don't necessarily understand what that feels like. Sometimes progress can be going very well, but they don't feel like it. They don't feel like the training is going well because they're feeling beat up or extra sore, or soreness sometimes feels like it's an injury, this or that. And sometimes that can get in the way. Now, on the flip side, when you're dealing with someone who's played sports their entire life, and I'll use an example here too, wrestlers. Man, I've coached a lot of wrestlers, obviously because I have a wrestling background. And one thing about coaching wrestlers is they're actually pretty hard to coach because generally speaking, they always want to do more. They always want to do more than what you tell them to do, which becomes a problem. And they always want to go harder than sometimes when you're not trying to necessarily go hard in a certain area, they'll go hard in that area anyway. They'll also probably never say when something's wrong. Like you could drive them into a ground. Again, this is generalizing here, but out of the wrestlers I've experienced, this is pretty common. You can drive them into the ground and they'll never say anything's wrong. So it's like you almost have to be extra cautious of just looking at the performance parameters and be like, oh man, based off from the data, it seems like something may be wrong. Nope, nothing's wrong. Feel great. It's like, nah, you're not really feeling great. So again, there's both sides of it. You have the person who's maybe never been an athlete before, and they might be giving you feedback that doesn't necessarily base off from the data. It's like, oh, based off from the data, things are going very well, but the feedback you're giving me makes it seem like things aren't going well. Got to be mindful of that. Then on the flip side, some athletes who kind of come from the hardcore background where they've been pushed their entire life and kind of gone really hard their entire life, you might look at the data and be, man, things don't seem to be going in the direction we want them to be. But based off from your feedback, it seems like everything's great. So sometimes there's just that extra level of trying to really be, put your detective hat on, kind of dig into the issues here. Because sometimes what your body's feeling is a lie, both ends of it. Like, sometimes you feel like things aren't going well, they are. Sometimes you just can be very mentally strong and can kind of push through when there's issues. So a lot of times as a coach, you just have to base off from what you're seeing physically with your eye, like what are you seeing from the client, and then look at the data. And this is easier for a coach because you're not emotionally attached. So it's very easy for you to just kind of sit back, look at the data, and make adjustments based off from everything you're seeing. You're not emotionally involved. You're not in the gym. You're not, in your own head, so to speak. I think that's, again, kind of going back to the point here, not everyone's an athlete, and that's okay. Some people are athletes when they don't think they're an athlete. Some people maybe have played sports in the past, but then when it comes to training, they don't necessarily respond like a normal athlete would. Again, a lot of this is just kind of a battle of semantics here because it doesn't really make that much of a difference. It's just really how you analyze your progress and how you're going to, kind of the mental and the physical component and how you respond and how you perceive that you're responding. I've noticed a difference between, based off from how people, what their backgrounds are And again, this actually could probably dig into this, and there's more elements even besides just being an athlete or non-athlete, kind of what you've experienced in your life. I think that would probably be play a part, but it just seems like it's easier to generalize as like athlete, non-athlete, versus, I mean, all the other factors that could play a part, kind of your background, kind of your lifestyle, childhood, et cetera, et cetera. All right, next point. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. That's the Theodore Roosevelt quote, and it's very applicable here. I think, it's been said before, but whenever we're talking coaching here, but this can apply to anything. It's hard. People aren't gonna care what you have to say unless they truly believe that what you have to say is genuine. So from a coaching standpoint is, look, like, yeah, you can be super fancy and talk about all the scientific knowledge you have and try to impress upon your clients just how smart you are, but they don't really care. At the end of the day, they just want results. At the end of the day, everyone just wants results. So however you can deliver the results, that's what's important. Now, again, if you can portray and really, truly care about what you're doing, it's going to be much easier for them to care what you have to say. Once you can develop a relationship, once you can demonstrate how much you really care about the other person and the results they get, you get more leeway. You get more room to say what you really want to say, kind of, because we geek out on the science. We geek out on the details. Most clients don't. Most people don't. They just want results. So if you start coming with a bunch of big words and just scientific jargon, just recognize that most people, they're not going to care about that. In fact, they're just going to be like, why are you saying all this shit that I don't care about? Why are you... it's probably almost going to seem like you're trying to compensate, which a lot of times it is, honestly. I don't know. I think this goes for anything. One of my favorite quotes is actually a Walter Payton quote, and it's something along the lines of, when you're good, you tell everybody, but when you're great, they tell you. Look, excellence, when you're excellent at something, when you're really great at something, it's obvious. On the flip side, when you're bullshitting somebody, it's generally obvious too. And for the most part, whenever somebody is trying to constantly give you a resume on their accomplishments, generally speaking, they're full of shit. Actually, this happened to me at the gym the other day. Funny story. I feel like I've talked to the dude before, but when I'm at the gym, for the most part, I'm just focused on what I have to do, and I'm not really there to communicate all that much. Not really there to talk. But there's this older guy. He seems like he always is dealing with a different injury. He's always has his arm in a sling, or something's always beat up on this dude. And he's an older guy, and I think before he mentioned that he used to power lift, whatever. But every time that I've talked to him, I think I've talked to him one other time, and he mentioned that he powerlifted and mentioned that he mentioned his numbers. I completely forgot him. Then I saw him the other day. Funny story, comes right up, mentioned that he powerlifted, and started telling me all of his lifts. I've never met someone who was actually really strong within the first 5 seconds of you talking to them have to list off their lifts. I've just never met anybody who's strong who's ever done that. If you're really strong, there's no point. Now, mind you, again, if, like I said, this person's dealing with some injuries. So if you've dealt with some injuries and you can't lift heavy anymore, maybe you've lost some size, hey, maybe when you do start talking to someone, maybe it's a little bit more, I guess acceptable to be like, oh yeah, well, I used to lift X amount of weight. But still, I'm calling bullshit. I don't think he did. He might have powerlifted. He probably did powerlift. But, he's talking big ass numbers. It just seems, it's always crazy to me how strong everyone used to be. Seems like everyone used to bench 400 pounds. Everyone used to deadlift 700 pounds. Like everyone used to. Back in the day, everyone was strong as shit. No one's strong anymore, though. All these people that used to be strong, they're not strong anymore. Why is that? Because it's funny, but a lot of people that I know that really were strong before, they're still strong. And they've went through injuries too, but guess what? They're still strong. They're not as strong as they were, but they're still strong. They don't need to give you a resume. People who are good at something give you a resume. People who are great at something, they don't need to. They don't need to give you a resume. Excellence is obvious. I don't know how we got talking about this, but kind of like the direction this is going. I just think that always be mindful of that when you're at the gym, just at life, whatever. If someone always has to like tell you their accomplishments, kind of list off the things that they've done, it always gives me a red flag. When people are constantly like trying to tell me like, oh, I did this, or I made X amount of money, or I this or that, I just always assume like, there's something here that just isn't right. Because I've never felt the need to tell anybody anything that I'm doing. I feel like, shit, when I'm in the gym or even in life, just how I carry myself should again, I'm not saying I'm successful, just saying who I am is who I am. My level of success should, when you talk to me, when you see me, I mean, I just think that it is what it is. Like, I don't need to try to flex on you. I don't need to flex on the podcast. I just tell you what my life's about, tell you what my thoughts are, tell you what I've done. You know, I don't need to list off things in this type of resume fashion. When you meet me, first thing I'm going to say is not like, yeah, I bench over 400 pounds. Don't know if you noticed that or not, but I do. I would never feel the need. I just never would. If someone asks, sometimes I even feel strange when people ask. I'm like, well, why does it matter? You know, I mean, I've thought that before when people, you know, I've just, again, like outside, in a powerlifting setting, see, the sport of powerlifting it's numbers based. So in a powerlifting setting, yeah, like, you know, what are your numbers? It's kind of like, you know, where you're at. But like when you get the old fashioned, like, what do you bench? You know, when you just meet someone who, when they ask you, what do you bench? But they don't really know much about training. I always feel just strange. Like, you know, it's like I could list off any number. Like, you know, like, and sometimes when people list off when you're super involved in the fitness industry, especially when you're, you know, deep into powerlifting, it's like, I don't know where you're at. Like, you could tell me any lift and should I be impressed or not? Like, to me, the number is not important. It's, are you continuously making progress? Are you getting better? Are you getting closer to your goals? That's what I want to be excited about. I mean, you could tell me any number and shit. And honestly, most of the time, I'm just like, cool, that's awesome. You could say any number, awesome. In a couple months, let's hope that number's higher. You know? Like, you could bench 500 pounds. And I'm like, awesome. Well, cool. What are you working towards? 515? Awesome. Come back to me in 6 months, a year. Tell me what you're at. Like, if it's higher, I'll be great. Or you could say 225. Awesome. Is that more than what you did a few months ago? If yes, great. Amazing. People don't care how much you know until you know how much you care. Let's get back to the point. I could go off on this all day long, but really, honestly, it ties in, because when it comes to information, again, like, you shouldn't have to list off a resume to your clients or really list off a resume to anybody. Yeah, initially during that like sales process, people might want to know what your background is, you know, make sure you're qualified for the position. But then after that, your actions should dictate. Like, you never want to be that person that tries to fall back on what they've done in the past. Like, you're only as good as your last at bat in everything in life. You're only as good as your last at bat. Like, what your stats were last year doesn't matter. What your stats were 3 years ago does not matter. What are you doing today? Where are you at now? And if you're doing a good job, it'll be obvious that you're doing a good job. It will be obvious that you care. It will be obvious what you know. It just will. This is shit you can't learn in a book. It's just not. All right, next thing. This is a big one. I think this one we could go off on multiple different directions here. But the sixth thing I want to talk about, as a coach, you get too much credit for when things go well. All right. Okay. Let's dig into this a little bit. All right. So as a coach, and this goes for fitness coaching, powerlifting coaching, bodybuilding coaching, football, baseball, whatever, just coaching in general. The coach gets credit when things are going well, but then they also tend to get a little too much credit, or too much blame, rather, when things go bad. I'm just talking about sport coaching, but really all coaching. But it's easier to think about sport coaches. Like, team wins the Super Bowl. Yeah, that coach, he was innovative. He was, ahead of the curve, did great. Then the next year, team does bad. Maybe they had some injuries. Maybe the quarterback didn't play well. Maybe whatever. They had a bad year. Damn, that coach, I don't know. He's losing grip of his players. Maybe they're not relating. Maybe he did something wrong. And that coach, he could have done the exact same shit both years. One year they won the Super Bowl. The next year they were 6-10, missed the playoff. The coach was the same person. He probably did the same habits. He could have. Maybe not. Maybe he did change, and maybe it was his fault. We don't know. But a lot of times there's outside circumstances that played a bigger role. Fitness coaching. You see this in powerlifting. Man, a lot of coaches, they love showing everybody on social media. They love taking they love taking the responsibility when their clients are hitting PRs, crushing meets, doing great. They love posting that on their Instagram story. They love showing that. What happens when things go wrong, though? I get it. It's bad for business. You're not going to post all the failures. And there shouldn't be many, but there probably will be some. And I get it. But as a coach, it's just important to remember that at the end of the day, the client's the one doing the work. That's why, I'll post testimonials. They are important because I think they're important for a couple of reasons. One, just from a business sense, just being honest, they are important. They help business. Showing success of clients helps business. But then also, from a client or a customer standpoint, it's important too that you want to recognize that, hey, this person's worked with people like me, This person's worked with someone. I can relate to him. I can relate to some of these success stories. But I don't post my clients nearly as much as I see other coaches do, really just because at the end of the day, man, yeah, we come up with a good program, we come up with a good system, etc. But they're doing the work. They're doing all the work. And a couple weeks ago, I saw this there was a little issue on social media. One of my friends, Casey Williams, he wrote an article based off from, I think, Stacy Burr at the Arnold, which I didn't really pay too much attention to it, but she competed at the Arnold, and then I think her coach posted something on social media saying, oh, we did it, but then it turns out like she wanted him to say that they did it, and then Casey wrote an article saying, like, as a coach, you never really should say that we did it, and it was kind of like this big back and forth, which I don't really care about, but what I wanted to comment on is it is kind of just a battle of semantics here on what you're saying, but from especially with powerlifting, I don't know if you should ever say we did it. Like, I guess you could. I don't have a problem with it. Like, I just don't have a problem with saying we did it if the client doesn't have a problem with it, as long as it's recognized that really the person who did it was the client. The client did it. Yeah, you as a coach, you lay the foundation, you put a good plan in place, client has to execute it, etc. But I just think that if you're willing to take the success, then you have to be willing to take the fall when things don't go well. If things don't go well, then as a coach, you got to be willing to say, hey, you know what? My fault. It was my fault. Things didn't go well. You just don't see that. You just don't see that much. It has to go both ways. But then, as we said before, I mean, it is important for the client to take ownership of progress, and take ownership of good and bad, just as the coach should take ownership of good and bad. Everything that happens, the coach should have ownership of, but so should the client. It's a partnership. I just think that we live in an age, and I love it because I've had a coaching business for 10 years, so I love the fact that coaching just continues to become bigger and bigger. When I started coaching, I've said this before, but there wasn't a lot of people doing it. I definitely wasn't the first, but there wasn't a lot of people doing it. There was very few people doing it 10 years ago. Like, you didn't have Instagram where just everyone who's been working out for 2 weeks is a coach now. Like, it didn't. And I know I sound like pessimistic when I say this. I'm not. Trust me, I'm not. I love that people have the opportunity to make money doing what they love. I love that. But the reason sometimes I probably come off as like, oh, I've been doing this for 10 years and all you people who just started, like, don't know what you're doing. I don't mean that in how it comes off sometimes. I think really the point I'm trying to make is, look, in the last 10 years, you don't understand how many people I've seen come and go. Like, I've seen hundreds of people just like you who've not had that much experience and started coaching and then fell off. And, who's to say that most of you young coaches who've just been doing this a year or two, you could be just like all the other people who have fallen off. It's hard to build a sustainable business online. It's easy to make some money online. It's easy to put up a shingle and you'll get a few clients and have a side gig. That's cool. It's easy. You can do that, and that's great. It's amazing. But can you build something that's going to last 10 years? Not a lot of people have. I'm not saying that you couldn't. You definitely could. You have the potential to. It's just it's a little bit more difficult. It's hard to build something that's going to last. And it's funny that we live in the age right now where it's easy to start. So there's no barrier to entry. Anybody can do it. So you see a ton of people doing it. That doesn't mean you shouldn't. If it's something that you love and you want to actually become great at this, then I recommend doing it. But if you don't want to become great, it's going to be hard. It's going to be very hard to be successful. Like, you have to live this. You have to want to be super successful at it. And it's hard to be super successful at anything that you're not 100% passionate about, because the people who are passionate about it are going to spend way more time and way more effort trying to become good. And that goes for anything. That's why I didn't wrestle in college, was because I wasn't as passionate about it anymore. I kind of got burned out. I did it for so long and I just kind of got burned out, and I was like, you know what? I just don't want to do it anymore. Like, I could still go through the motions, but I wasn't as passionate anymore. Like, I wasn't willing to wake up at 5 and do conditioning work and then after school go and do practice or do lifting afterwards and do 2-a-day sessions. And I just like that. I used to do that, and I used to love doing that. And that was like part of, I felt like my edge was that I was so passionate about it and so disciplined to it that I did all the little things that you need to do to be successful. And when you're super passionate about something, it doesn't seem like work. It's not hard. That's about, like, training to me is not hard. Like, I'll always train because I love it. I'm super passionate about it. I try to be able to have more time to do it. Like, it's not a matter of, for me, when I'm going to train, it's just I will train. And when something's very important and you're super passionate about it, you find a way. You find a way to get shit done. Like, there's no excuses for not getting it done because you just eliminate them. If something's going to stop you from doing it, you just get rid of it. So, I mean, that's kind of where I'm at. And the same thing goes for business too. Like, you just don't allow anything to get in your way of being successful. Like, you got to have your main priorities. And if it's not one of those main priorities, then it just gets punted. Like, it's gone. It's forgot about. You'd never bring it up again. It's over. Yeah. Don't know how I got talking about that. But going back to the point, as a coach, it's important to recognize that, hey, take ownership of everything, good and bad, it's never 100%. The success is never going to be, it's not even going to be equally distributed. The client success is always going to be the client. The client does something very successful, achieves something great. The client put in all the work. You might have helped put the perfect plan in place, but the execution was key. And this is kind of the topic of ideas versus execution. A lot of people have ideas. Most people just can't execute on them. You shouldn't get that much credit for a good idea. It's kind of the same thing with putting good coaching in place. Yeah, you need a good program. You need a good plan. But without the execution, it's nothing. Kind of the same thing with ideas. You need a great idea. But without the execution, the idea is just that. It's just an idea. Some food for thought. Next point. Deep down, almost everyone, and I say almost, but vast majority of people, regardless of what they tell you, want it all. They want to build muscle, lose fat, gain strength, etc. We all want it all. That's what we really want. When we get deep down, that's what we really want. We want everything. So as a coach, or practical, if you're just someone listening to this, you don't have a coach, you probably recognize the fact that you want it all. You want to build muscle, gain strength, lose fat, look amazing, be amazing. You want everything. We all do. But, okay, we recognize that it might not be possible to get it all. It's definitely not possible to get it all the time. So what we need to do from a coaching perspective or just from an individual perspective is we need to nail down what's most important. Key, most important. And really, from a coaching perspective, but again, as an individual, from a coaching perspective, don't just assume. A lot of times we assume things like, oh, well, I know what you're saying. You're saying one thing, but I'm assuming you mean something else. That could be false. That definitely could be false. Like I've had a lot of clients over the years where I've kind of heard what they've said. I kind of dig down. It's like, oh, it seems like they want to build muscle, gain strength, lose fat. They kind of want to do everything. Okay. Yeah. That's not too out of the ordinary, kind of what everyone wants. But in my head, I'm like, oh, but I think what they really want is they want to kind of maintain muscle, maintain strength, but lose fat. That's kind of what I think they want. But then when you dig down deeper and you ask the right questions and you really find out, no, really? It's actually just want to kind of maintain their current body composition, but they just want to get really, really strong. Or they just want to build as much muscle as possible, just be as big as possible they possibly can without gaining too much fat. Again, the words might have been all about the same. What you heard was all about the same. But it's important not to just assume what you think the person wants. It's to dig down and find out what they really want. Because initially, most people are just going to give you very surface level answers, surface level. And maybe that's all they've really ever thought about. But it's important to get deeper, find out the true pressure points, find out what they really, really want. Again, this goes back to what we talked about in the beginning of the show. It goes back to confidence and buy-in and all that, and believing that what you're doing is going to work. Well, part of really building that buy-in is believing that what you're doing is actually going to get the desired result that you really, really want, that you deep down really want. Not just surface level, like kind of want what you really want. And again, it might be different than what you assume. Now, when you're talking about just you as an individual, the same thing. Like you might just be saying what you think you want. Kind of what everyone wants. Like, I just want to be a little bit leaner, but it'd be nice to have a little bit more muscle or this or that. But dig down, like what's really important to you? Because really what we're talking about here is, again, it's priorities. Since we can't just do one thing all the time that's going to work us towards all these goals at the same time simultaneously, we got to focus on one or the other. And sometimes even what we want isn't what we really want. And what I mean by that is really when it comes to priorities, It's what are we willing to give up? Not really what we're willing to do, but what are we willing to give up? So, for example, say someone who's kind of wishy-washy, they kind of want it all, kind of want to gain some strength, build some muscle, lose some fat, etc. But deep down, you find out that they really don't want to diet. They really don't want to be in a caloric deficit. And you really find that. You really dig down. It's like, man, they have no interest in dieting. Well, the fat loss thing is kind of out of the table. It's like, okay, well, all right, well, how can we set this up to where you don't gain any more fat? But it sounds like what you really want is to not gain any more fat, but just train to, or eat to perform well in the gym and build a little bit of muscle. Like, I think that's what you really want. And then maybe we can kick the can down the road and then diet later when maybe the dieting idea, the dieting concept isn't something that you're completely against. Maybe that's what we do. But then on the flip side, you may have a client who kind of says that they want it all, but deep down they won't be happy unless they're losing body fat. So it's like, okay, well, hey, you know what? We might have to put the building muscle thing on the back burner for right now while we focus on the fat loss, and then we'll come back to building muscle at a later date when we get you to a body composition that you're comfortable with and happy with. And then again, you have the other layer of the client's history, and sometimes what they want isn't possible based off from where they're currently at. Like, you've maybe had somebody who's a chronic dieter and they've been a caloric deficit off and on for years, and they're just not in a point where they can lose fat right now. It just wouldn't be a good position to continue to aim to lose body fat, where they just, hey, you need to spend some time out of a caloric deficit. You need to spend some time in a surplus to almost get to your ultimate goal, which again, what we're saying is probably everything. Your ultimate goal is probably everything. It's just, how do we periodize this for everybody to ultimately get to what we all want, but in a systematic way that meets what you really want short term, what you're capable of short term, and can be happy with short and long term. So kind of interesting here. It's something to think about with yourself. And remember that, hey, we don't need it all right now. We probably want it all, but we don't need it all right now. What's most important? Let's pick that direction and let's move in that direction for a long enough time to see results in that direction. And then we can reevaluate. We don't have to make our final decision right now. It's not a final decision. This could be fluid. It's just when you do make a decision, you have to move in that direction long enough to actually see results. Don't be mixing and matching. That doesn't work. It just does not work. You don't want to be that chronic dieter that every time you talk to them, they're in a diet, but they've never really lost weight, because then they're constantly breaking the diet too, because again, they kind of have multiple different goals. It's important to really find what you want to do, what you want to achieve, what's most important, move in that direction, and then systematically over time, you can change, and we can change directions a little bit to get what we ultimately want in the long run. All right, next thing. 8th thing we're going to talk about, and this kind of builds on what we were just talking about. But the answer is rarely black and white, and context is everything. Look, there's very few wrong answers when it comes to training and nutrition. I've seen almost everything work. Seriously, I've seen almost everything work. And the best coaching tends to be in that gray area. The best progress tends to be in that gray area, kind of thinking outside the box, being creative. It's, I say this all the time, but there really is there's no substitute for experience, because without the experience, there's no substitute for it. It's very hard to have the context of that almost everything works. Some things work better for certain people at certain times, but almost everything works. Like, almost every diet works. If it creates a caloric deficit, it doesn't matter if we're going no carb or high carb. If it creates a caloric deficit, it's going to work. Now, again, this kind of all wraps together. You'll have people like, oh, well, I don't respond well to carbs. Well, maybe that's true. Or just maybe it's when you're on a low carb diet, it fits your lifestyle better and you can stick to it better. Maybe that's why you've been more successful with it. Maybe just based off from your own preferences, your personal preferences, when you're on a low carb diet, it doesn't feel like you're dieting as much because your preferences are, you tend to like higher fat foods. Now, for some people who love carbohydrates, when they go on a low carb diet, it's miserable. And they can't do it for very long, and then they have to break the diet. So to them, man, low carb diets don't work that well. We're not breaking the principles here. Okay, people would see this and be like, oh, well, Kyle, you said everyone responds the same. To the principles, yes. Now the methods, there can be many methods, but principles, there are very few principles. Tons of methods. And again, I think this is a big thing that people screw up. People get too caught up on the methods and not focused enough on the principles. That's why people love programs, like named programs and named diets. We're just talking about principles. Like you're not on some fancy diet that's magical based off from the name. No, it's just the principles are moved around. The principles are a little bit different, but the principles are the same across the board. It's just that they're changed slightly, packaged differently. It's a different method. There's tons of methods. Everyone has a method. Some are better than others, but most of them work as long as the principles are maintained. Don't get so caught up on, I'm following X program. I'm following X diet. No, you're following the principles. Yeah, it's named and it's packaged to you in a certain way, but it's just the principles. You don't have to be on a certain diet. You don't have to be on a certain program. You're just following principles. At least you should be. It's important to recognize that, and again, once you recognize the principle concept, it's easier to you're just not going to get fooled as easy. Because you can look at something and not look at it as the name. You can look at it as what it's trying to do. Like, okay, what's the goal of this? Oh, I like this. I like this element. Maybe I'll include this element to what I'm currently doing. I don't need to completely discard everything that I thought was true before because I was on a certain named diet, and now I'm going to try a different named diet, and I'm doing something completely different. No, you just moved the deck chairs around a little bit. Or I was following X program, thought that was good, saw new program, jump ship, following new program now. Again, principles, not methods. All right, next thing. Got two more things. Going to wrap this one up. Ninth thing. Touched on this a little bit. Most people don't love training as much as I do. Some people do. But most people don't. Most people don't love it as much as I do. And as a coach, I think it's important to recognize that most of your clients won't love it as much as you do. That's okay. You don't have to love it. Actually, I recommend most people probably shouldn't love it as much as I do. If they do love it as much as I do, then I go from initially, I'm like, okay, I'm your training coach, nutrition coach. How about I'm also your business coach? If you love training as much as I do, and we have you set up on a training and nutrition program, but you work a normal job, but you truly love this as much as I love this, well, guess what? Now I'm also going to be your business coach because we're going to try to make you at least a side gig where you're making some money off from this. Because if you love it as much as I do, then this is like pretty much your entire day. It'd be very hard to truly love it as much as I do and work a normal job. Because I don't think I could work a normal job at this point. It would be very hard for me. I mean, I have other interests. Like there's a lot of business stuff that I really love, but like I don't have a ton of other interests. Like my day is all this, and partly because this is my business, but I spend all day doing this. So, and I've spent all day doing this for 10 years. Went to college for this. Like it's hard to love something that much for that long and then not be able to recognize the fact that not everybody thinks that same way. You know, a lot of people, and even high-level athletes that you would assume like, hey, they're a high-level athlete, they must love training. That's not always the case. That's not always the case. They just may be very good at it, and they enjoy it. They like it. Don't necessarily love it. They don't need to love it. You don't need to love this to make progress. It makes it easier if you do, but you don't have to. And part of good coaching is, hey, how can we put together a program that you maybe not love, but you like enough to be able to execute it and be consistent with it. It's another thing too is, and I think this kind of goes in a little bit different direction, but as a coach, if you live this, 24 hours a day, essentially, other than when you're sleeping, like you live for training, like when you're not working on training programs and shit like that, you're reading about it. And when you're not reading about it or coaching people, then you're training yourself. You kind of get wrapped up into it. But you got to remember that a lot of clients and a lot of just general people, they aren't. So sometimes you can take for granted what you know and you just assume everyone knows it. Well, most likely they don't. And if they do, they probably just know at a surface level. They're just kind of headline reading. That's what a lot of people do. Like actually me, like outside of business or fitness or sports, outside of those things, I pretty much am just a headline reader and everything else, most other things. Meaning I might be able to have a conversation about it, but if you really dug in, I probably wouldn't know all that much, like outside of just the headlines. And a perfect way, when someone says something like, oh man, there's so much information, I don't know who to believe, that is very true, but that's just because you're headline reading. There's a study that will say almost anything if you just read the headline, just read the abstract. But when you really dig in and figure out how the research was designed, the methods, the setup, et cetera, when you have all the background information to pull from, you recognize that, there's a research study to almost say anything, but there's a reason for that. It doesn't necessarily mean there's a research that supports everything, and that means that there's no information to be gained from it. There is a lot of information to be gained from it, and everything, if you have the background information, everything makes sense, or at least it should make sense. It's very easy to recognize why something shows something. So it's like, oh, you read the headline and it says that, what was the one recently? I saw a post around on social media. It had something to do with eggs, like if you eat 3 eggs a day or something, I don't know what it was, heart disease probably increases dramatically. If you follow me on Instagram, you know the consistency life. I should be dead by now if that's the case. Again, if you have the background information, it's easy to see these flashy headlines and put context to it and understand where it came from. But again, not everyone needs to have that. Not everyone should have that. So as a coach or as a practitioner yourself, just recognize that, hey, there's probably a good answer to it. And we do live in the information age, so there's a ton of information available. But again, because there's so much information, it is a little bit harder to decipher the good information for most people. So that's another kind of reason why coaching is so beneficial, is you can have that unified voice. Because if you don't know who to believe, then you tend to just spin in circles. You tend to follow one thing for a period of time, maybe long enough to see results, maybe not, and then you jump shift and try something different, and then it's just it's a whirlwind, go in circles. Last thing actually, number 10, most important. You know what this is. You have to know. If you listen to this podcast, if you follow me on anything, follow me on Instagram at Hunt Fitness, what's the 10th thing that's most important that I've learned over the last 10 years? Come on now, it's consistency. The best plan is the one that can be consistently followed. And the reason I brought that, I debated even putting this in there because I'm like, you know what, this is just too cliche. Everyone knows I'm going to say something about consistency. But the reason I brought this up, and the reason I put this last, was because it's actually something I've changed my mind about. If you would have caught me early on in my coaching career, I didn't have the experience. So a lot of a lot of what I fell back on was shit I learned in college, kind of the textbook answers to stuff, the research I did on my own outside of college, and my own personal beliefs and kind of what I did with myself. And because I only had, even when I was in college, I graduated college at 21, and shit, even at that point, I had probably worked with over 100 clients by then, probably even more. At 21, I've already worked with over 100 clients. And at then, I still didn't really have that much experience. I thought I did, but I really didn't. And at that point, I still probably would have been of the belief that, yeah, consistency is important, but man, if you just provide the really, or just like the textbook, quote unquote, most optimal program for somebody, that's the right answer. The right answer is just the textbook, most, quote unquote, most optimal program, quote unquote, most optimal diet. This like pie in the sky, like answer, that's what's best for everybody. And they just have to kind of just figure it out at that point. That's probably the direction I was at. That's probably the answer I would give you. I mean, I might have said something different, but that was probably the answer deep down I believed. Like I just thought that, hey, you know what the research says is best, and that's just what you have to do. But now I've recognized that, I like to have an evidence-based approach, and there's definitely better ways to do things, and that's kind of the way I want to shift people. But really the best way is whatever you can be consistent with. And if you can't be consistent with something, it doesn't matter how good on paper it is, because it does not matter. If you can't be consistent with it, it does not matter. Nutritionally, training-wise, etc. And as a coach now, and as a practitioner with myself, we just got to build that consistency. We have to build that mind-numbing consistency that we can do day in, day out, for weeks, for months, for years. That's how we get results. Like the perfect program on paper, the perfect diet on paper, yeah, that might be a decent starting point. Maybe we start with that idea in mind, but then we work backwards. We reverse engineer it to what can the person, what can yourself, what can you actually do and follow through with? Because that's the right answer. That's the best program. And it's going to be fluid. The best program for you right now, the thing that you can be consistent with right now, will be different in 6 months, in a year. Remember what I said in the beginning. There's levels to it. The level you're at is where you're at now. That doesn't mean you're always going to be there. That means you probably won't be at this level for very long if things go well. As you move up a level, you can handle more. You become a person who can handle more. So you're able to handle more. You're able to do more. Or less. Maybe less is better for you in a little bit. Maybe you go through some things and you're right now, you don't have a lot of responsibility and you can focus more time on training and just everything's well. And then you get to a period of time in your life where things, you have more stress, you have more responsibility, more things. You know what? The best program for you at a later date is actually less work. That happens too. That happens from time to time. This is all very fluid. It's all very fluid. The right answer today might not be the right answer tomorrow. Consistency is always the right answer, though. All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed this podcast. Hope you enjoyed the Absolute Strength episode 206. 206. Had fun. Hope you enjoyed it. Talked a lot about coaching today. If you're interested in coaching, let me know. KyleHuntFitness@gmail.com. Send me an email. Let me know if you want to take your training or nutrition to the next level. Work with me one-on-one. Let's get on a call. Let's talk about your history, your goals, see if it would be a good fit. PRBreaker.com. Check out some PR Breaker materia. All study dose ingredients. Great pre-workout. I love it. Use discount code HUNT10 to save yourself some money. Absolute Progress Power Building Program link is in the show notes. Absolute Strength version 1 and 2 link is in the show notes if you want to get on a training program. Or if you want to get an Absolute Strength podcast shirt, link is in the show notes as well. Until next time, guys, peace. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Absolute Strength podcast. I know I had a ton of fun producing it for you. And before you go, if you could just drop me some feedback, I'd love it. I love reading your feedback. So you can go over to iTunes, leave a 5-star rating, write a little review, what you think of the podcast. I absolutely love it. I read every single one. But it's cool if you don't want to do that. I get it. No one wants to really go out of their way to do anything, let alone write a review. But I want to get your feedback. So drop me a line on Instagram at Hunt Fitness, or on Facebook, Kyle Hunt, or on Twitter, or send a pigeon or something. I don't know. I just want to hear your feedback. So If you want to give me some feedback, let me know what you think. Hit me up on Instagram @HuntFitness. And before you go, I have one last thing I want to say. I have a program I want you to check out. It's actually called the Absolute Strength Program, and the link is in the show notes. It's a program I designed to help increase my own squat, bench, and deadlift. And I got pretty strong off of it, and I think you're going to like it. It's a great book. Thousands of people have got amazing results from it. It's in the show notes. All right, guys. Until next time, until next episode, peace.